Chapter 1029. Outside Gadotsi and the Others. The white light that was capable of destroying the world gradually weakened until it disappeared. If Gadotsi and the others came out to take a look, they would be shocked beyond words. This was because the black mud that originally covered the ground had completely disappeared after the white light dissipated. No, it didn't disappear. It had been destroyed by the white light that had destroyed a third of the world. The hegemon's halo, Kvarina, contained an inheritance that could destroy a third of the world. It was known as the strongest gift of the Flash faction in the Box Garden world, and could be said to be Azedakaha's proudest move. This was because this move was the manifestation of the three-headed dragon's inheritance that had destroyed a third of the world. It was a move that completely belonged to Azedakaha. Unfortunately, Wuming's spiritual base had fused with Azedakaha's body. This move that he was so proud of also belonged to Wuming. Wuming had used the ability to destroy a third of the world to choose to destroy the black mud that had covered half of Mesopotamia. Logically speaking, even the hegemon's halo shouldn't be able to destroy half of the black mud in one go. However, this was the black mud of the origin. Wuming only needed to add the power of origin to the hegemon's halo, and it was like a hot knife cutting through butter. It was very easy to destroy the black mud that had come ashore. Even the black clouds in the sky dissipated, revealing the sun in the west. The long period of black clouds caused people's perception of time to become blurry. Even day and night were somewhat blurred. For example, when the solar ephemeris acted as the sun to reflect Tiamat's figure, Gadotsi and the others thought that it was night. Wuming was also one of the people who had such a misunderstanding. Is the day almost over? The three-headed dragon's head with large dragon horns looked at the sun that had already moved to the west and sighed. This head belonged to Wuming. He hadn't done anything, but he realized that more than half the time had passed. Looks like tonight is going to be a sleepless night. Wuming, who was flying in the sky, looked down again. Because Wuming had removed the black mud that surged onto the land, the seawater observatory along the Persian Gulf coast reappeared. However, the lighthouse-like observatory had been broken down in the middle, and the collapsed part was nowhere to be seen. No longer paying attention to the collapsed observatory, Wuming landed on the coast of the Persian Gulf and folded his wings. The black mud on the land had indeed been cleared away by Wuming, but the black mud in the sea was not reduced at all. At this moment, from the Persian Gulf to the Indian Ocean in the distance, the sea surface was pitch black and looked quite muddy. There was basically no seawater, only black mud. After all, the tyrant's halo had destroyed one-third of the world. Wuming's ability to wipe out half of the black mud on the continent was already a rare effect. As for wiping out the entire ocean of black mud, Wuming was temporarily unable to do so. This was because the entire Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean connected to it had turned into black mud, and the Indian Ocean could even be called the Black Mud Ocean. As for Tiamat, she was not dead anyway. She was probably thrown into the sea of black mud by Wuming's halo. Just as Wuming was vigilant, a melodious sound wave came from the sea. The three-headed dragon immediately spread its shadow wings, including itself, to block the sound wave. It suddenly spread its wings, and the shadow wings instantly dispersed the sound wave. Master in the myths, Tiamat didn't have many special abilities, but she was quite good at spirit of speech. The head on the left of the three-headed dragon with a crown suddenly spoke. This was the head controlled by Kalas. Mother is the mother goddess of creation. She doesn't need or have many abilities. Her body is her strongest weapon. This time, it was the head on the right of the three-headed dragon that spoke. This was the head controlled by Enkidu. Indeed. With her huge dragon body, just a casual attack from her is filled with power. In addition to her almost unbeatable authority, she doesn't need any extra power at all. Wuming nodded. The so-called power didn't refer to having fancy abilities, but to being able to defeat the opponent no matter how many or how strong their abilities were. Wuming was almost the same as Tiamat. Ever since Wuming found out that he was the origin dragon, he didn't put much effort into pursuing power because the key to his power was the power of the origin dragon and the powerful body of the origin dragon. It was apparent that Tiamat was the same. Her body was her best weapon. Not only that, but Tiamat also had some terrifying abilities. For example, her authority, the Sea of Life. The Sea of Life had a cell-level force conversion effect called aminogeas. It could turn any creature that came into contact with or entered her Sea of Life into one of their own. Musasobo Benkei had fallen for this trick. This ability existed before the Black Origin Mud and Tiamat fused. After fusing with the Black Origin Mud, this ability was only strengthened, although it was a little too much. At this moment, the Persian Gulf and the entire Indian Ocean were Tiamat's Sea of Life. Wuming couldn't kill her in the Sea of Life. To give a less precise example, could you die of a common cold while receiving treatment in a famous provincial hospital? Although it was too absolute to say that it was 100%, it was indeed impossible to die from a cold under such conditions. After the song was broken by Wuming, the Sea of Black Origin Mud began to stir again. Then masses of Black Origin Mud surged and condensed, forming a huge body. This was exactly the same as Tiamat's dragon body, but the size was completely different. This time, Tiamat's body was obviously bigger than before. This meant that Tiamat's body was bigger than the three-headed demonic dragon at the moment. Is the entire Sea of Life Tiamat's body? If Wuming was still guessing before, his parents were now certain of it. It seemed that the space that Gadatsi and the others brought with them was indeed inside Tiamat's body. However, why didn't Tiamat attack Gadatsi and the others? Instead, Ishtar only began to move after she blasted a hole in the space. Was Tiamat still asleep? Or was there some other reason? This is troublesome. Wuming realized that he couldn't defeat Tiamat. However, Tiamat shouldn't be able to defeat the three-headed demonic dragon either. Tiamat opened her huge mouth. The sound wave that was full of magic struck again, and this time, it was more powerful than the last time. Wuming dared to say that even if Matthew activated his noble phantasm, he might not be able to block this attack. It was enough to show how powerful the sound wave was. However, it was still useless against the three-headed demonic dragon. At this moment, the three-headed demonic dragon was a powerful existence driven by the fusion of Wuming, Kalas, and Enkidu's spiritual base. Kalas aside, Wuming's spiritual base was the best among the servants, and Enkidu's real body was even more powerful. Together with Kalas, the three of them became a trinity. The three-headed demonic dragon that bore the name of fire worship sect's evil dragon, Dahaka, was already in existence that no servant could match. No, it should be said that the three-headed demonic dragon at this moment was not in existence that could be defeated simply by having powerful strength. After all, the three-headed demonic dragon's current identity was a human evil, and defeating a human evil often required not only strength, but also wisdom, human wisdom. Both sides were human evil, so neither side could do anything to the other. However, Wuming still had the upper hand at the moment. After all, he was once a human, and the three-headed demonic dragon was a trinity existence. At this moment, Tiamat was facing three existences, which was 3 against 1. That was the advantage that Tiamat did not have. Master, I detected a powerful binding on Goddess Tiamat's body. Binding? Yes, and it seems that Tiamat added the binding herself. Chapter 1030. Even after fusing with the three-headed demon dragon's spiritual base, Kalas was still able to use her own abilities. That crown was the manifestation of Kalas' ability. Kalas had always been cautious and conscientious. She did all sorts of research, probing, and testing on Tiamat in an attempt to find out what weaknesses she had. The heavens rewarded those who worked hard. Kalas actually managed to discover the problem with Tiamat. That was Tiamat had self-restraints. Tiamat is the creator goddess of Mesopotamia. The dragon body in front of us can be said to be the spiritual base of Tiamat after she fell and became a beast. Even so, Tiamat is still extremely powerful. However, the strange thing is, the Tiamat that we fought against wasn't as powerful as we thought. Wuming voiced out the strange that Kalas mentioned. That's right, Master. When Tiamat fought against us, she didn't display much power. This is the strangest thing. Even without Wuming, the current Tiamat wasn't undefeatable or despairing to Gadatsi and the others. That was, Tiamat didn't have an overwhelming and decisive ability. This wasn't something that a creator goddess should have. The only ability that Tiamat still had was the Sea of Life. However, It could even block Nabistan's Fang for a while. It couldn't be considered an overwhelming ability. The Sea of Life couldn't even compare to Wuming's Hegemon's Halo. At the very least, the Hegemon's Halo could instantly destroy the black mud on the ground, while the Sea of Life couldn't instantly flood the ground. However, even if Tiamat has self-restraints, we can't do anything to her. Wuming was not facing the problem of weakening Tiamat, but the problem of not being able to stop Tiamat. Wuming wasn't afraid of Tiamat, who didn't have overwhelming power, but he couldn't defeat Tiamat or stop Tiamat's actions. Tiamat's Sea of Life covered the entire Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. If they did not destroy it completely, there was no way to defeat Tiamat. This was what Wuming couldn't do to Tiamat. The reason why Tiamat couldn't do anything to Wuming was because Tiamat didn't have any overwhelming moves. No, Master, you can seal Tiamat, Kalas suggested to Wuming. Kalas was an artificial spirit that supported the top magic attire. When it was first created, it had extremely high intelligence and could deal with all kinds of situations. Later on, Kelly became Wuming's noble artifact, and had undergone the baptism of the origin together with Wuming's main body, which made her stand out from the rest. Regardless of whether it was the magical attire's performance or the artificial elf's wisdom, she was far ahead of the rest. Since Kalas was able to suggest this, the idea was feasible. You're saying that I should use the 12 incarnations? But I can't use it in this state. Wuming could use it previously because the spiritual base of human evil wasn't completed, so it left behind a self-protection mechanism. Now that human evil's spiritual base was completed, Wuming's original abilities were temporarily lost. After all, this was a human evil spiritual base that was transformed from the corpse of the three-headed demonic dragon, Azidakaha. To activate this spiritual base, it even required the trinity of Wuming, Enkidu, and Kalas. Although this spiritual base was unprecedentedly powerful, there were also many disadvantages. Wuming's inability to use his own abilities was one of them. This spiritual base was considered a complete product in terms of strength, but in other aspects, it was still considered a half-finished product. It could be modified in the future, but now wasn't the time to do so. Master, this spiritual base contains a sovereign sun and 2 simulated star maps. They can be used by you. When Kalas said that, Wuming couldn't help but be stunned. Of course, I know that Azidakaha has a Vesta, but whether it can be used on Tiamat is another matter. The three-headed demonic dragon fire worship sect came from Mesopotamia. The Avesta's user was a three-headed demonic dragon, so it couldn't be used on humans or fire worship sect's abilities. The former was because this was the final trial for humans, while the latter was because of homology. Although Tiamat wasn't a god that belonged to fire worship sect directly, fire worship sect's roots were still in Mesopotamia. The box garden world was particular about inheritance. Mesopotamia and fire worship sect had deep connections, so this ability might not be used. Moreover, Avesta didn't have the sealing effect. Also, you said that there are additional simulated star maps in Azidakaha's body? Wuming was a little moved. Having a simulated star map was a great fortune for anyone, but Azidakaha had 2. How could Wuming not be moved? It was normal that Wuming didn't know about Azidakaha's gift. When Azidakaha's spirit had died, Wuming had placed his body in the gift card and returned to the root for Kalas to transform. Because his physical body was still alive, the power that existed in Azidakaha's body wouldn't be like when Silent killed Maxwell, which resulted in a falling object. Only the tyrant's halo was used by Azidakaha in front of Wuming. As for Avesta, Azidakaha didn't even have time to use it before it was sealed by Wuming's golden sword. Wuming had heard about Avesta's specific effects from Galgi. Forget it. Kalas, control the body. Enron, help me. I'll go inside and take a look. Yes, Master. Yes, Master Hyunryong. After Wuming finished speaking, the middle head of the three-headed demonic dragon drooped down as if it had lost its soul. After that, the three-headed demonic dragon's entire body was controlled by Kalas with Enkidu assisting from the side. The three-headed demonic dragon once again gathered the tyrant's halo in its mouth. Even if it couldn't kill Tiamat, it had to constantly interfere. Tiamat, on the other hand, let out a sorrowful and angry song. On the surface of the Sea of Life, something seemed to have appeared and began to shake. Inside the spirit base. When Wu Ming said to take a look inside, he meant to go to the depths of the spirit base to take a look. The three-headed demonic dragon was a trinity, and Wu Ming, who was one of them, could naturally do this easily. Wu Ming, who had turned into a ball of consciousness, came to the interior of the spirit base. In front of Wu Ming, there were 3 balls of light. 2 of them emitted the starry light of the universe, while the remaining 1 emitted the light of the sun. There was no doubt that this was a sun sovereignty and 2 simulated star map creation. Wu Ming reached out his hand to one of the simulated star map creation, and immediately sensed the effect and name of this simulated star map creation. Is this a Vesta? Wu Ming's hand separated from the ball of light, and no longer cared about it. Then the remaining 2 are the sun sovereignty and the additional simulated star map creation that Kalas mentioned. Wu Ming placed his 2 hands on the balls of light without hesitation. In an instant, the information of the sun sovereignty and simulated star map creation was transmitted to Wu Ming's mind. Dragon sun sovereignty and simulated star map creation. Virtual star Taisui. Chapter 1031. This simulated star map is interesting. Wu Ming showed a thoughtful expression. When Az Dakaha had fought with Wu Ming, he had only used the new ability that he had obtained after assimilating with the Black Origin Mud. He had not used any of his original abilities. Even if he had used it, he had only used the Hegemon's Halo. Wu Ming had thought that Az Dakaha had underestimated his opponent. However, it seemed that this was not the case at all. The reason why Az Dakaha had not used his own abilities was because those abilities would not have any effect on Wu Ming. Az Dakaha had 2 powerful gifts. One was the simulated star map, Avesta, and the other was the Hegemon's Halo, Karina. The former made Az Dakaha invincible in the box world, while the latter was Az Dakaha's signature. Possessing the former was enough for Az Dakaha. What the strong possessed was not some flashy ability, but the ability to defeat the enemy. Eating the world with a single move also existed. However, there were times when one trick to eat everything did not work. For example, Az Dakaha and Tiamat. The reason why Az Dakaha had the Dragon Sun Sovereignty and the simulated star map, Virtual Star Taisui, was because Az Dakaha had naturally fused with his body when he broke the seal. That's right. Just like the no-name flag was one of the items that broke the seal, these 2 items were items that sealed Az Dakaha. The Dragon Sun Sovereignty only had the effect of strengthening the spirit core. However, every simulated star map had restrictions. Coincidentally, Virtual Star Taisui's restrictions prevented Az Dakaha from using it. Avesta was also useless against Wu Ming because Az Dakaha couldn't absorb, cancel, or borrow the power of the origin. It could only use its new ability after combining with the Black Origin Mud to deal with Wu Ming. This was why Az Dakaha didn't use its own ability. It was the same for Tiamat. The Sea of Life could be said to be the bane of all things, but after fusing with the Black Origin Mud, Wu Ming developed a resistance, because Wu Ming and the Black Origin Mud were of the same origin. In addition, Tiamat had sealed herself, causing Tiamat to be unable to take down Wu Ming. Wu Ming was also facing the same problem at this moment. The ability of the Trinity as Daka, one of the 7 great human evils, was also unable to destroy Tiamat. Therefore, when one move was no longer fresh and could no longer dominate the world, a new move was needed. And Kalas found a new move for Wu Ming, which was the illusory Star Taisui. Through the contact of his arm with the ball of light, Wu Ming also learned of the illusory Star Taisui's ability. It ignored all conditions and forcefully sealed natural gods and star spirits. This was the ability of the illusory Star Taisui. And Tiamat happened to be a natural god. This was the method that Kalas had mentioned, to seal Tiamat. After Kalas's adjustment, the Dragon Sun Sovereignty and the simulated star map illusory Star Taisui in Az Dakaha's body had completely become this spiritual basis item, or rather, its ability. Therefore, Wu Ming could ignore the restrictions of the illusory Star Taisui and use it directly. Then let's begin. After Wu Ming finished speaking, the ball of light that his right hand touched emitted a huge amount of starlight, which instantly enveloped Wu Ming's consciousness. In the outside world, the three-headed demonic dragon controlled by Kalas was hunting down Tiamat's the 11 sons. That's right, the 11 sons of Tiamat were born from the Sea of Life again, and in terms of strength, they were even stronger than the previous 11. However, it was all in vain. One after another, the demonic beasts were killed by the three-headed demonic dragon. Sun-like flames shot out from the Sun Lion's mouth and attacked the three-headed demonic dragon. The pure white three-headed demonic dragon threw away the corpse of the demonic beast that had died long ago. It then clawed at the fire of the sun, causing it to explode. Following that, the three-headed demonic dragon gathered the flames and flashes that had once destroyed 1/3 of the world in its mouth and engulfed the lion. The sky had become dark at some point, and the storm carried a tornado that swept toward the three-headed demonic dragon like a petrel. The three-headed demonic dragon spread its shadow wings, which turned into a curtain that covered the sky and directly cut the tornado in half. However, the curtain did not stop. As if it had a life of its own, it directly slashed at the dark mass in the sky and instantly cut it in half. The last two demonic beasts, Ugur and Mdablutu, were eliminated. At this point, the 11 newborn demonic beasts were all killed by the three-headed demonic dragon. However, when the three-headed demonic dragon was eliminating the 11 sons, Tiamat was not idle. Another strange song was heard. Suddenly, the entire Sea of Life was in a riot as if it was boiling. In the next second, the 11 sons reappeared from the Sea of Life. No, not only 11 demonic beasts, but more and more demonic beasts emerged from the Sea of Life. Moreover, all of them had the same strength as the 11 sons. Without a doubt, this move was the product of the fusion of Tiamat and the Black Origin mud. It was impossible for Tiamat alone to give birth to so many powerful demonic beasts in such a short time. Among them, the most numerous and the most powerful was the winged Ramu. When Wuming controlled the three-headed demonic dragon, he used the tyrant's halo to clean up the Black Origin mud on the land. At the same time, he also cleaned up the Ramu and the few mermaid kururu that were scattered all over the land. There were no longer any demonic beasts on the land, except for the sea. Any one of these demonic beasts had the strength to rival, or even defeat goddesses such as Ishtar, Quizzard, and Ereshkigal. Looking at the number of demonic beasts, if all of them swarmed up, the entire Mesopotamia would probably be destroyed quickly. The Uruk's protective shield would definitely not be able to protect them. However, the three-headed demonic dragon did not panic when it saw this scene. The chain wrapped around the right head extended, and the tip of the chain gently scratched the huge dragon's body. PFFF. The three-headed demonic dragon's body was sliced open like a hot knife through butter. A sizable wound was cut open, and fresh blood spilled out as if it was free of charge. The spilled blood did not fall into the Sea of Life. Instead, it turned into white figures with small shadow wings and flew into the air. They were miniature versions of Azidakaha. Azidakaha's innate ability was that its blood could turn into a two-headed dragon with god-level strength. This spiritual base was based on Azidakaha's body, so it naturally included this ability. Moreover, it was an upgraded version. The blood didn't transform into a two-headed dragon, but a miniature version of Azidakaha. Roar! The miniature versions of Azidakaha let out a huge roar that was different from their tiny bodies. They rushed towards the demonic beasts that were several times, or even dozens of times larger than them. The huge demonic beasts that emerged from Tiamat's Sea of Life also met the miniature versions of Azidakaha. At this moment, the head in the middle of the three-headed demonic dragon seemed to come back to its senses and became energetic. Chapter 1032. Master, you're back. As soon as Wuming returned, Kalas relinquished control of the body to Wuming. I've come into contact with the illusory Star Taisue's ability, and I can activate it at any time. As Wuming spoke, he observed the current battlefield and couldn't help but frown. The reason was naturally because of the current situation. Firstly, the number of magical beasts that Tiamat gave birth to shocked Wuming. Secondly, the three-headed dragon army couldn't defeat the magical beast army, and was now retreating. As the number of winged Ramu was the highest, both sides were basically fighting in the air, and only a small number of them were fighting on the sea. Whether it was on the sea or in the sky, The three-headed dragon army was retreating. It couldn't be helped. In terms of individual strength, the magical beasts that Tiamat gave birth to were much stronger than the three-headed dragon formed from the three-headed dragon's blood. Even if these three-headed dragons could continue to divide their blood, each individual that was split was weaker than its superior individual. This was the main reason for the phenomenon of them retreating. Wu Ming immediately had the thought of, I can't delay any longer. Illusory Star Taisui Activate. Wu Ming didn't need to follow the rules to activate the simulated star map, so he only needed to shout or even think about it to activate it. The majestic voice from the three-headed dragon's body was transmitted to the void. All the three-headed dragons and magical beasts that were fighting to the death, including Tiamat, were stunned. The former was due to the deterrence of Wu Ming's voice, while the latter was purely due to fear. In the next second, a cluster of light that emitted a cosmic starlight emerged from the three-headed dragon's body. The petite size of the cluster of light created a sense of contrast with the three-headed dragon's huge body. However, the threat that the cluster of light brought to Tiamat was far greater than that of the three-headed dragon. A sound wave that was more powerful than before materialized and attacked the three-headed dragon. The three-headed dragon army and magical beast army that were in the path of the sound wave attack were all shattered into powder by the sound wave. Faced with Tiamat's move that was different from the past, Wu Ming became serious. The three-headed demon dragon opened its mouth, and a beam of light belonging to the tyrant's halo enveloped the incoming sound wave, instantly extinguishing the sound wave's follow-up attack. It was a flash of starlight, shot out from Tiamat's eyes of the stars, hidden behind the sound wave. It seemed that Tiamat was also anxious. Wu Ming didn't waste any more time, and had Su Xing Taisui take action. You are no longer needed here, primordial goddess of creation. Leave this world that no longer belongs to you. In front of Wu Ming, Void Star Taisui's sphere of light fell into the sea of life, and Tiamat's enormous body stopped moving. Tiamat seemed to let out a final cry. In the next second, Tiamat's huge body turned into black mud and merged into the sea. The magical beasts that were born in the Sea of Life were also turned into black mud and fell into the sea. The dark clouds in the sky had already dispersed, and the sun had completely sunk into the west. Night had fallen. In the central region of Mesopotamia, in the fortress city of Uruk, it was nighttime. At this moment, a circle of lights surrounded the Uruk. The Uruk city was also brightly lit. People were celebrating. In order to celebrate the end of the world, Gilgamesh ordered the soldiers to set up a venue in the Uruk city, and even outside the Uruk city for people to dance, eat, and thank the gods. The reason why the venue was set up outside the Uruk city was because the Uruk city was not enough to accommodate everyone's celebration. After all the humans in the Mesopotamia region were gathered in the Uruk city at this time. In the current season, the night was not cold. In addition, the outside of the Uruk had been purified by the sea of black mud. The magical beasts had completely disappeared, and there was no need to worry about being attacked. In the Divine Tower, Gudatsi and the others gathered together to enjoy the fruits of victory after the end of the world. However, because the outside of the Uruk had been affected by the sea of black mud, there were very few pastures and farms, and there was a shortage of food. Only a few pastures and farms in the north of the Uruk were still intact. However, this did not change the fact that there was a shortage of resources. Therefore, Gudatsi and the others, as well as the Uruk people outside the Divine Tower, did not have much food to enjoy. The pastures and farms had to be reserved for grain, cattle, and sheep in order to prepare for the future life of the humans in Mesopotamia. Therefore, the people were just immersed in the atmosphere of surviving the disaster. At most, they would dance and eat very little. Of course, this included Gudatsi and the others. In the center of a large room in the Divine Tower, a large dining table was placed there. Gudatsi and the others sat around the table and tasted good wine. Although there was not much food, Gilgamesh could still provide drinks for Gudatsi and the others to drink freely. Of course, Gudatsi, Matthew, Mayu, and Anna were drinking drinks and not wine. The leopard man and Fimbaba were playing in an open space at the side. Enkidu, who was worried about Fimbaba, was paying attention to Fimbaba, while having a conversation with Gilgamesh that he had not had for many years. Although Gilgamesh was more or less not used to the fact that his close friend had a gender, a close friend was still a close friend. This would not change. Zhuge Kongming and Leonidas I sighed at the sweet and mellow taste of the wine in their hands. Nuwakamaru, who was beside them, was drinking alone as if he was mourning for Musasobo Benkei. Quizzard and Ishtar clinked their glasses. Ishtar also poured a glass of wine for the absent-minded Ereshkigal, which gave Ereshkigal a fright. It was only after Mayu, who was beside her, said something to Ereshkigal that Ereshkigal calmed down. Matthew and Gadotsi gently tasted the drinks that Gilgamesh brought out. Gadotsi, who was beside Anna, was also tasting the delicious drink because of Merlin's harassment. She had to pretend that she did not care about the delicious drink. Everyone was immersed in the celebration dinner of Tiamat being defeated by Wuming, but because Wuming was not present, many people were more or less absent-minded. For example, Mayu, Ereshkigal, Anna, Gadotsi, and Matthew. However, Wuming was not dead, he was not there. What the hell is holding Assassin back? Gadotsi and Matthew chatted and complained softly. However, everyone present was a servant, and Gadotsi's soft complaint was equivalent to speaking directly in their ears. That, I also want to know. After Ereshkigal spoke weakly, Mayu, who was beside her, looked a little shaken, and Anna's eyes also drifted. Gadotsi and Ereshkigal's questions attracted everyone's attention. Except for the leopard man, Ishtar looked at Ereshkigal, who became absent-minded again, and shook her head helplessly. Didn't Golden Sparkle say that Hyunryong is now implementing the follow-up work on Tiamat on the coast of the Persian Gulf? He will be here in a while. You guys don't seem to see that guy. Did he take your souls away or something? Ishtar's criticism made Ereshkigal's face turn red. She naturally knew that Gilgamesh said that Wuming was on the Persian Gulf, but Wuming was not there. Not only her, but Gadotsi and the others also couldn't help but be absent-minded. And Ereshkigal had a feeling that Ishtar was actually worried about Wuming, but she didn't directly show it. Therefore, Ereshkigal and Ishtar quarreled again. Humph. What does it have to do with you that I care about him? You greedy goddess. Do you want to take away other people's thoughts? What did you say? You despicable guy? At that moment, Ishtar also became angry and stared at Ereshkigal. Seeing this, Gadotsi no longer expected to get any information from the sisters, and then turned to look at Enkidu. Seeing Gadotsi looking at him, Enkidu showed a warm smile to Gadotsi. Don't worry, Sir Wuming is indeed dealing with some aftermath matters. He will be back soon. On the coast of the Persian Gulf, Wuming, who had already returned to his human form from the three-headed demonic dragon, was sitting on the collapsed observatory with a light ball in his hand. His eyes were closed as if he was immersed in it. The dragon horn headdress on his head was dutifully guarding Wuming. Unfortunately, there was no danger around at this time. Chapter 1033. Ever since the Void Star Taisway sealed the entire sea of life that represented Tiamat, the Persian Gulf and even the Indian Ocean returned to their original ocean state. Other than the fact that no living creatures could be seen, the ocean at this moment was no different from before. After that, Wuming also removed the three-headed demonic dragon state, but the spiritual base of human evil still existed. After all, the transformation of the spiritual base was basically complete, and it could not be changed back even if he wanted to. However, there was one thing to note. Wuming could not recreate the three-headed demonic dragon's body with Enkidu and Kalas for the time being. After all, the three-headed demonic dragon's human evil spiritual base was only possible because of the blessings of Tiamat, the first Hassan, and Finbaba, who had temporarily obtained the title of Crown Rider. Now that Tiamat was sealed, and the first Hassan had left after the crisis was over, the Crown Rider on Finbaba had also disappeared. Naturally, the three-headed demonic dragon's form could not be maintained. In other words, it was already a miracle that Wuming could still exist with this spiritual base at this moment. Now that the connection had collapsed, it should have been forced to leave this world. It could only be said that it was convenient to have someone at the top. The reason why Wuming was sitting here was because the Void Star Taisway had sealed Tiamat's light ball. Because the spiritual base of Wuming's human evil was still there, the Void Star Taisway would not disappear, and the sealed light ball would not dissipate. The reason why Wuming was sitting here and sealing the light ball was actually that he was trying to take out the black mud that had fused with the sea of life. After all, the existence that had fused with the black mud would naturally be hostile to Wuming, and Wuming could not sit idly by and do nothing about the black mud. In addition, the foundation of human evil was the love for other humans. No matter what, Wuming still had sympathy for Tiamat, especially after Wuming studied the light ball and came into contact with Tiamat's will for a while. It really makes people sigh. Wuming opened his eyes and let out a long sigh. He had no way of completely removing the black soil from Tiamat's sea of life. This could only be done after he returned to the Great Origin. During this time, Wuming felt Tiamat's thoughts. I miss the children. I want to come into contact with the children. I want the children to return to my arms, but I'm afraid of bringing harm to the children. This was Tiamat's extremely simple thinking. Wuming could use his origin power to kill Tiamat the same way he had killed Az Dakaha, but Wuming couldn't bring himself to do it. Aziz Dakaha's evil was because he wanted justice to stand on his corpse, while Tiamat's evil was simply a mother's instinct to care for her child who had abandoned her, as well as the world that did not need her. And this mother was also afraid that she would harm her child. Otherwise, she would not have placed a self-seal on herself. Tiamat had only been chosen to become a bug in the human system. This bug had to be fixed in order for the system called humans to continue. And this bug had been created by using the love for humans. Fixing the false love that had been forced to become was a little cruel in Wuming's eyes. Aziz Dakaha had already died at Wuming's hands. Wuming did not want another existence similar to Aziz Dakaha to follow in his footsteps. However, it was obviously impossible to let Tiamat go just like that. Fortunately, I have the illusory star Taisui. If not for this, I'm afraid it would have reached a point where only one of us could live. Ignoring all conditions to seal a natural god, although the target audience was small, the effect was unexpectedly powerful. If not for this, it was hard to say who would die in the end. Wuming felt a headache at the thought of so many powerful magical beasts that had been born from the sea of life. And fortunately, those magical beasts were formed from the black soil in the sea of life. They were also a part of Tiamat. Otherwise, Wuming would not have a good way to deal with so many magical beasts at once. And if the time was delayed, who knew how many magical beasts Tiamat could give birth to? The sea of life was so big, and Tiamat had the support of the black soil. Who knew what would happen in the end? Therefore, this was why Wuming believed that the outcome was still uncertain. In any case, let's bring Tiamat back to the root of life first. Once they returned to the root of life, there would definitely be a way. After all, the root of life was the source of miracles, and Wuming was a god inside. Wuming shook his head and rested for a while. After relieving his fatigue, he merged the ball of light into his body and stood up. Wuming looked at the position of the stars in the sky and estimated the time. At this time, Tachika and the others probably haven't finished their banquet. I should still be able to make it, probably. If not for the last two words. But Wuming knew that the Uruk was short of resources at the moment, so he did not expect to be able to eat delicious food. Let's go join in the fun. Wuming turned around, and his body disappeared into the portal that had opened at some point in time. Then the portal closed. On the coast of the Persian Gulf, there was only the night wind blowing the waves and hitting the rocks in boredom. Uruk. Although the Uruk was still brightly lit, most people had collapsed on the ground. Don't get me wrong, they were asleep. They reeked of alcohol, and even some children were no exception. But only a few children reeked of alcohol. This was the scene that Wuming sensed when he walked out of the portal that appeared in the sky. Gil really put in a lot of effort this time. I'm afraid the Uruk has run out of alcohol. Alcohol could not replace food, and the people who listened to the king did not drink because of the influence of the apocalypse. So there was still a lot of alcohol left in the Uruk. There was not much food, so they drank, sang, and danced. This was how the Uruk citizens celebrated tonight. And because the tense minds were relaxed, there were many people who had fallen asleep in and out of the brightly lit Uruk. By the way, most children just fell asleep after relaxing their minds. There were not many children who secretly drank. Although this era was thousands of years away from the modern era, Gilgamesh still protected the children well. After all, children were the future of mankind. No longer paying attention to the scene inside and outside the Uruk, Wuming flew straight to the god tower. Anyway, the night was not cold in this season, and there were no beasts outside. Let them sleep. At most, they would have a stiff neck because of the wrong sleeping posture when they woke up the next day. After entering the god tower, Wuming went directly to the room where Gadatsi and the others held the banquet. In the corridor near the door, Wuming met Siduri. Siduri, haven't you gone to rest yet? When Gilgamesh was slacking, Siduri was the manager. After all, the Uruk citizens couldn't hold a banquet without a manager. Otherwise, it would really be chaotic. Seeing that it was Wuming, Siduri bowed first. I'm not tired, Master Hyunryong. Have you finished your work? As an insider, Siduri naturally knew from Gilgamesh and Enkidu that Wuming had something to do in the Persian Gulf and hadn't returned yet. Yes, I've finished my work. I came back to see if I can make it in time for the banquet. Immediately, Siduri smiled. You're late. Master Hyunryong, Master Ishtar, and the others have all left. Miss Tachika and Miss Matthew are also asleep at the table. I just met Master Enkidu and asked me to send a towel over. Siduri said and raised a piece of white cloth in her hand. It was a wool towel that could be used to cover the body. Even if it was not cold at night, Enkidu was still very caring. Wuming nodded as if he understood, then reached out and took the towel in Siduri's hand. Then I'll send it over. Ignoring Ishtar and the other goddesses and Enkidu, he was going to see Gadatsi and Matthew first. All right, Siduri, go and rest now. Immediately, this is the will of the gods. After Wuming finished speaking, he directly left. In response, Siduri smiled. Master Hyunryong is really just like Master Enkidu, gentle. Chapter 1034. Wuming had seen how hard Siduri had worked during this period of time. She was not much more relaxed than Gilgamesh. At this time, how could Wuming allow Siduri to continue working? However, with Siduri's character, it was certainly impossible for her to rest by herself, so Wuming could only order her. He walked quietly into the room where Gadatsi and others were gathered. At this moment, the room was exuding the aroma of good wine. There was no doubt that this was Gilgamesh's collection of good wine. Wuming even suspected at this moment that Gadatsi and others fell asleep because of the smell of wine. As soon as he entered the room, Wuming saw Gadatsi and Matthew sleeping soundly on the table. The others were nowhere to be seen. Ishtar and the others must have left on their own. And someone like Leonidas I, who got drunk easily, must have been carried away by them. In addition to Gadatsi and Matthew, who were lying on the table, Gilgamesh was looking at the brightly lit Uruk by the window with his hands on his chest. Oh Hyunryong, you're finally here. Gilgamesh looked back at Wuming. I thought I could make it in time for the banquet, but it seems that I'm late. He walked quietly to Gadatsi and Matthew, covered them with a thin towel, and then Wuming walked to Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh set up runes around Gadatsi and Matthew, so he didn't have to worry about disturbing Gadatsi and Matthew. There wasn't much food, but this king left some good wine for you. Gilgamesh showed a king's smile, and then golden ripples appeared from his body. 2 golden wine cups and a golden wine jug emerged from it. Gilgamesh held the golden wine jug, poured it into 2 golden goblets, and then threw one of them to Wuming. The wine cup flew lightly to Wuming as if it had a life of its own. Wuming didn't use much strength and easily caught it, then drank it in one gulp. Although this wine is delicious, it's not to my taste. Wuming threw the empty wine cup away, and the golden wine cup turned into golden particles and dissipated. This king is the same. Gilgamesh also drank it without caring about his image, and like Wuming, he threw the golden wine cup and golden wine jug aside, letting them turn into golden particles and return to the king's treasure. No matter how sweet the wine created by the gods is, it is still in existence that this king and humanity must abandon. This was the reason why it was not to his taste. Without responding to Gilgamesh's words, Wuming walked to Gilgamesh's side. With his back facing Gilgamesh, Wuming stood in front of the window and looked at the starry sky. The Uruk people survived, and you are still alive. The Sumer dynasty can continue, and human civilization can continue. When Wu Ming took away Tiamat, who was sealed in the illusory star Tai Sui, this singularity would also be repaired and returned to the right track. What Wu Ming meant was that it was time for him to leave. After all, his purpose was to help Gadotsi and Matthew repair the singularity, and to make up for Wu Ming's regret of leaving Mesopotamia. Whether it was the Gilgamesh of that world, or Wu Ming, who took care of Gilgamesh's childhood, was already half a father to Gilgamesh. I know you won't forget what happened here, and I also know you know very well that the Gilgamesh I am familiar with is the queen. Although because of the suppression force, Uruk Hyenryong existed in every parallel world, and there was a story between Gilgamesh and Hyenryong, it was impossible for Gilgamesh not to notice this. After all, the stories created by different genders could not be exactly the same. This was for sure. Of course. Gilgamesh, who turned around, nodded without hesitation. After all, the Hyenryong this king is familiar with can be said to be a woman. You can't be the one this king is familiar with. Wu Ming was shocked. It must be the doing of the two suppression forces. Did it have to be so exciting? Ha 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 ha, this king is joking. It's so nice to see your face. Gilgamesh patted Hyenryong's shoulder as if his scheme succeeded, and he laughed very happily. However, not long after, Gilgamesh stopped laughing. But this king is really happy to see you. After patting Wu Ming's shoulder again, Gilgamesh left the room. At this moment, only Wu Ming, who was looking at the night sky, and the sleeping Gadotsi and Matthew were left in the room. Me too, Gil. As for what Gilgamesh said about Hyenryong in this parallel world being a woman, it was unknown whether Gilgamesh was joking or not. Early the next morning, Gadotsi woke up groggily and found herself lying on the bed in her and Matthew's room in the Chaldean embassy, and Matthew was lying next to her. Hey. Hey hey hey. As if she thought of something terrible, Gadotsi's face turned red, and she screamed in horror. What happened, Senior? Matthew had a conditioned reflex because of Gadotsi's scream. He suddenly woke up from his sleep and sat up. No, nothing, I just woke up and had a nightmare. Gadotsi was silently relieved. After all, she found that the clothes she was wearing did not change. It seemed that someone sent her and Matthew back here, and put them directly on the bed. Suddenly, a voice came from the corner. Are you awake, Tachika, Matthew? Gadotsi and Matthew looked and found that it was Wu Ming. Assassin? Did you send me and Matthew back? Gadotsi guessed. Wu Ming, who was sitting cross-legged in the corner, nodded. Seeing that you were sleeping soundly, I didn't wake you up. Instead, I sent you back here. Wu Ming pointed to the bed where Gadotsi and Matthew were, and then pointed to the corner where he was, and then continued to speak. I didn't know where to go, so I just stayed. But don't worry, I didn't stare at your sleeping faces the whole night. Wu Ming smiled. However, the more Wu Ming said this, the more embarrassed Gadotsi and Matthew felt. Then, I'll go down first. Gadotsi immediately got up from the bed and walked out of the room. Senior Villo, I'm a little worried about you. I'll go downstairs and take a look. Then Matthew also left with a blushing face. In this regard, Wu Ming smiled. Gadotsi and Matthew were really quite cute. By the way, last night, Wu Ming did not stay because he had nowhere to go, nor did he stay to see Gadotsi and Matthew's sleeping faces. The reason why Wu Ming stayed in Gadotsi and Matthew's room was because Roman contacted Wu Ming through Gadotsi's bracelet last night. Chapter 1035. Last night, after Gilgamesh left, Wu Ming also left not long after. However, Wu Ming left with Gadotsi and Matthew. The method was simple. Whether it was using magic or mental power, Wu Ming could take the two away without waking them up. After returning to the Chaldean embassy, Wu Ming saw Merlin, who was secretly eating at the table on the first floor. After chatting with Merlin for a while, Wu Ming took Gadotsi and Matthew upstairs. By the time the two of them had settled down, it was already the latter half of the night. Just as Wu Ming was about to leave to find a place to rest, Gadotsi's wristband rang. Hyenryong, no, the root dragon. I have something to talk to you about. Roman was someone who knew Wu Ming's true identity, and Wu Ming also knew Roman's true identity. And Roman came to Wu Ming so mysteriously at this time, and even addressed Wu Ming as the root dragon. It seemed that there was something big going on. Less than 20 employees of Chaldea have gone to rest. The director and her followers are still maintaining the Holy Grail and will not let Chaldea contact the outside world. Da Vinci has also returned to his workshop. Tachika and Matthew are also asleep. So, Roman came to contact Wu Ming when no one else was around. Obviously, he must have something important to say. Are you feeling uneasy about the enemy who burned humanity? Wu Ming asked casually. On Chaldea's side, Roman fell silent. It was obvious that he did not expect Wu Ming to tell the truth. It was not difficult to guess. Roman came to Wu Ming secretly, because he did not want others to know. Only secrets must be kept. And there was indeed a secret between Roman and Wu Ming. That was Wu Ming and Roman knew each other's true identities. And this involved the mastermind behind the burning of humanity. After all, Gydia and Roman were inextricably linked. So, Roman came to Wu Ming because of Gydia. No, to Roman, it was because of the mastermind behind the scenes, the fake Solomon. After all, Wu Ming did not tell Roman that the fake Solomon was the tactic Gydia created by Solomon. I don't know why, but I keep feeling uneasy. I know you know the enemy's situation very well. Can you tell me? Roman did not know the details of the enemy. Wu Ming did not tell him, and he only saw a hint of danger before he gave up his power. However, I refuse. Wu Ming refused without thinking. Wait a minute, why? Even Roman could hear Wu Ming's perfunctory tone. The reason is simple. Wu Ming found a stool and sat on the bed where Gadotsi and Matthew were. He chatted with Gadotsi's wristband. Although it was a little strange to chat with someone who was sleeping soundly. Anyway, there was magic on Gadotsi and Matthew. He did not have to worry about waking up Gadotsi and Matthew. You're now a human, Roman Acheron. You're no longer any powerful existence. You don't have the ability to save everything. You've been like this since you became a human. You're just an ordinary medical staff. Wu Ming did not know if Roman had a trump card. Even if he did, it was uncertain whether it would be effective against Gydia who had the black soil. And there was one more thing. Roman was a human at the moment. And he was a human who was not as good as Gadotsi. The matter of defeating the mastermind behind the scenes was not his responsibility. He was qualified to take back the future of mankind as a human. However, he could only do it as a human. As a human, he did not have the power to do it. This was the price he had to pay for giving up all his power to become a human. Even if he had seen the crisis of mankind on the eve of giving up his power, in a sense, this was what he deserved. If it's you, you should understand one thing. Everyone has to admit the consequences of their decisions, whether the consequences are good or bad. So you just have to be an honest medical staff. Roman, who heard this sentence, was sitting on a special sofa in Chaldea. He pressed one hand on the other hand as if he was touching something under the glove. Roman's expression was a little lonely. But, that's enough from you, once King Solomon. Wu Ming instantly interrupted Roman's words, and also revealed Roman's true identity. That's right, Roman was King Solomon. He was the follower of the former director, Marisbili Animusphia, who participated in the Winterwood Holy Grail War 10 years ago. After winning the Holy Grail War, he became an ordinary human by making a wish. On the eve of losing all his power and becoming a human, he used his clairvoyance to see the burning of humanity. However, because he was powerless, he could only desperately learn in an attempt to use the identity of a human to save the future. That was why he, the real one, thought that the guy who called himself Solomon was a fake. He was also almost suspected by Gadotsi and the others because he helped Solomon to explain. You want to be an ordinary person, and also want to save the world. How can there be such a good thing in the world? I'm afraid you're a little whimsical. Wu Ming mocked mercilessly. Moreover, this is the result of your own choice. You can't regret it. You have to face it, and admit it. Don't worry about it, and don't try to stop it. You have to know that if the sky falls, there are tall people to hold it up, and you're just an ordinary human now. After that, Roman's rather weak voice came from Gadotsi's bracelet. Know that. Didn't I say that if the sky falls, there are tall people to hold it up? What are you, an ordinary human, worrying about? Roman was frightened by Wu Ming's reprimand and didn't dare to speak. Wu Ming picked his ears as if he was bored. He spoke as if he made the final decision for Roman. In short, your mission is to help Tachika save humanity, heal Matthew's broken body, assist Olga Marie in managing Chaldea, and leave the rest to me. After all, Wuming was partly responsible for Gidea's mutation. He couldn't leave the black mud alone. He also had to take responsibility for what the black mud caused. However, the difference between Wuming and Roman was that Wuming had the ability to solve all of this, and Roman didn't have such ability. Actually, I just wanted to say that my trump card can't be called a trump card 100%. Plus, I don't know why, but I have a bad feeling, so I wanted to ask you to help me. Roman in Chaldea loosened his crossed hands and smiled awkwardly. Wuming, who was in a different time and space from Roman, narrowed his eyes helplessly. He looked like a dead fish. If I knew you were so open-minded, I wouldn't have wasted so much time talking to you. That was the meaning in Wuming's eyes. Therefore, Wuming with dead fish eyes found a corner and sat up, no longer paying attention to Roman. Only Roman's calls echoed in the room until he was almost discovered by the Chaldea personnel, who woke up in the night. As for Wuming, he sat there until daybreak. That was what happened last night. Wuming looked at the door where Gadatsi and Matthew left, then he stood up and walked out. In fact, although Wuming and Roman's conversation was very casual, Wuming also had thoughts and speculations. Wuming believed that Gidea might have become stronger. Chapter 1036. Roman didn't know that the so-called mastermind behind the scenes was actually Gaia, the magic technique he had developed himself. However, the guy who claimed to be Solomon, who appeared at the London Singularity, was indeed himself. Therefore, in Roman's opinion, the enemy was likely to simply control his corpse and impersonate Solomon. Therefore, no matter how powerful Roman's trump card was, it could only target his controlled corpse and could not eliminate the mastermind behind the scenes. Therefore, Roman did not have much confidence in using his hidden means as a trump card. Under such circumstances, Roman even felt uneasy. This meant that his hidden means were probably useless, which was why he came to Wuming. Wuming had always believed in intuition, so he also had a certain degree of trust in the intuition of others. What did Roman's worry mean? Roman did not know who the enemy was, but Wuming knew very well. This meant that Gidea was likely to have gotten rid of the restrictions of Roman's hidden means, and there was no doubt that Gidea had become stronger. Although Wuming was not afraid of Gidea, this information was indispensable to Wuming. In short, he would deal with whatever came his way. He bid farewell to everyone first and returned to the route. Not long after, Wuming also went downstairs. After going downstairs, what entered Wuming's eyes was naturally the scene of Gadatsi and the others eating breakfast. At the rectangular table, Gadatsi and Matthew sat on one side, while Merlin and Anna sat on the other side. The four of them had a rather bland and small breakfast. This was made by Anna. Because there was not much food, it was bland and in small quantities. Wuming randomly found a seat and sat next to Anna. He did not know if Gadatsi and Matthew had recovered, but Wuming decided to sit opposite them. You're about to leave. Why don't you have a good meal? Wuming then joked. Hee, the Uruk is quite short of food at the moment. Let's have breakfast as a memento. Gadatsi answered Wuming with a smile, as if she was not the one blushing earlier. I'm a little reluctant, Matthew said softly. However, Matthew's face was still slightly red. It seemed that Matthew's skin was not as thick as Gadatsi's. After all, we're integrated into the Uruk city. Merlin took a sip of the clear soup and smacked his lips. TSK, it seems that I can't live without Uruk food, ha 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 ha. Even if it was bland, the taste of Uruk had left a mark on Merlin's taste buds in the past 6 months. As expected of Merlin. Anna glanced at Merlin and sneered in a cold voice. After all, it's me. However, Merlin seemed to have received some kind of praise and was quite pleased. Well, who could be more thick-skinned than Merlin? Anna, are you okay? Wuming, who had chosen to ignore Merlin, suddenly asked Anna beside him. When he chatted with Merlin last night, Wuming learned from Merlin that Anna had used the power of the Holy Grail to transform into Gorgon. Together with Ereshkigal, they had dealt with the 5 powerful demonic beasts that attacked the Uruk. Although Anna had now recovered her body, He was still worried about Anna's wombing, so he decided to ask. I'm fine. Anna shook her head. Although Sakura Madu was in the Holy Grail that wombing gave to Anna, the function of the Holy Grail still existed. Using the power of the Holy Grail to transform into Gorgon, and then using the power of the Holy Grail to recover, it would not affect Anna, nor would it cause any harm to Sakura Madu and the Holy Grail. Anna put down the bowl, and then took out a golden crystal from her arms. I'll give this back to you. After Anna used the Holy Grail, it became like this, but Sakura Madu was still inside. I'm a servant, I can't bring her back. That was the reason why Anna returned the Holy Grail to Wuming. I know, I will bring Sakura Madu back to her time. Wuming nodded and put away the crystal. By the way, assassin, what happened to the Holy Grail in Tiamat's body? The Holy Grail that disturbed this time was in Tiamat's body, and at this time, Tiamat was defeated by Wuming, so it was reasonable to say that the Holy Grail should have appeared. Matthew's face was also red. He had also forgotten about the Holy Grail. The celebration and fatigue caused everyone to not care about the whereabouts of the Holy Grail. Gudatsi only remembered this matter when she saw Anna return the Holy Grail that Wuming gave her to Wuming. I sealed the Holy Grail and Tiamat together. Wuming said, and with one hand, a cluster of light appeared in Wuming's hand. These were the seals formed by the virtual star Taisui. Later, I will take away Tiamat's seal along with the Holy Grail. I can't give it to you for the time being. Wuming turned his hand again, and the virtual star Taisui that sealed Tiamat disappeared. This doesn't matter, we have reverse detected the location of the final enemy through the existence that tried to invade Chaldea. Roman's voice came from Gudatsi's wrist. The use of the Holy Grail in Chaldea was basically to analyze and find the person who made it. When Wuming stored the Holy Grail that sealed Floros in Chaldea, Chaldea was almost invaded because of it. However, it was a blessing in disguise. Chaldea unexpectedly located the location of the enemy through reverse search, so there was no need for the Holy Grail. How about this, Roman? I will go explore first. Tachika will stay in Chaldea for now. Why? Gudatsi looked at Wuming in confusion. She had passed through all 7 singularities, so why did she need to be so careful when facing the final enemy? Moreover, Gudatsi couldn't bear to see Wuming in danger alone. Similarly, Matthew couldn't do it either. Senior Villo, I think it's better for us to go with you. Little Eggplant was rarely serious. However, Wuming smiled. You've misunderstood. I just need to verify something. If I go with you, I'm afraid I'll hurt you. Both Gurgle and Mashu nodded their heads as if they suddenly understood. With Wuming's powerful strength, it was very likely that he would hurt his allies. However, Roman and Leonardo da Vinci in Chaldea noticed something. How could a strong person like Wuming accidentally hurt his allies? It was obvious that Wuming didn't want Gudatsi to be in danger. But in the end, Roman agreed with Wuming's decision. Alright then. Tachika and Matthew will go back to their rooms to rest after returning to Chaldea. We'll wait for Hyunryong's notice before we act. No matter what, Gudatsi wasn't as powerful as Wuming. She was just an ordinary person. If something happened to her, it would be over. Wuming nodded. After you finish eating, we'll go to the Divine Tower to bid farewell to Gil and the rest. At the same time, Wuming also freeloaded a meal. Chapter 1037. At the bottom of the tower, Wuming, Gudatsi, Matthew, Merlin, Anna, Mayu, and Ereshkigal came together. The reason why Mayu and Ereshkigal came with Wuming and the others was that when everyone was in the middle of breakfast, Mayu came to the Chaldean embassy with an embarrassed look on her face. Mayu just came to Wuming, and the reason why she took Ereshkigal with her was to repay Ereshkigal for staying the night last night. She took Ereshkigal shopping with her. That's right, Wuming came back late last night, and when everyone finished the banquet, Mayu left with Ereshkigal. After knowing that Mayu was Wuming's sister, Ereshkigal was quite serious about building a small house for Mayu in the underworld. By the way, because Mayu was a servant at the moment, the underworld would not cause any harm to Mayu. Last night, Mayu and Ereshkigal slept in the underworld. At the bottom of the tower, the soldiers who went to report to Gilgamesh returned, and invited everyone to enter the tower. Wuming and Mayu walked in the end because Wuming and Mayu whispered to each other. Mayu, I didn't take good care of you. How did you sleep last night? Wuming held Mayu's hand with an apologetic look on his face. First, he tried to remove the black mud that fused with Tiamat. After that, he talked to Gilgamesh and sent Gadotsi and Matthew back to the Chaldean embassy. After that, he discussed with Roman. After that, he thought about the clarity from Roman's words. After all these things were done, the sky was almost bright. Sister L is very good to me. You don't have to worry about me, Brother Wuming, and I'm not an insensible child. Feeling the warmth of Wuming's palm, Mayu responded to Wuming with a warm smile, indicating that she understood him. Wuming couldn't help but sigh. He suddenly remembered Mayu's problem when he was eating. Fortunately, Mayu could find him by herself. However, it was still thanks to Ereshkigal. I have to thank her later, Wuming thought as he watched Ereshkigal's back. Ereshkigal, who noticed that someone was watching her, couldn't help but blush, and her body became stiff. Ereshkigal knew who was looking at her. Only Wuming and Mayu were behind her. It was not intentional. As if it was a coincidence, Gadotsi, Matthew, Anna, and Merlin took the lead, and Wuming and Mayu deliberately stayed behind. So Ereshkigal could only be in this position. Thank you for taking care of Mayu. Wuming, who walked quickly to Ereshkigal's side, thanked her. As for this name, it was a simplification of Ereshkigal. After all, Ereshkigal was a bit too long. No, it's nothing. Ereshkigal talked about her hair, and waved her hand generously. Of course, it would be better if she didn't speak so nervously. You now have my divinity. The underworld can no longer restrict you. For the next period of time, you can live well on this land. This was both Wuming's gratitude to Ereshkigal and Wuming's sympathy for Ereshkigal's past. Yes, you are leaving soon. Ereshkigal, who was originally nervous, suddenly became lonely. This was the tragedy brought about by time travel. The two sides were not of the same era, and they had to be separated in the end. Humans basically prohibited or restricted the technology of time travel. This was also one of the reasons. Ereshkigal sped up and distanced herself from Wuming and Mayu. Brother Wuming, can't we meet Sister L again? At this moment, Mayu also seemed a little unhappy. Children were very emotional, especially little girls. Although Mayu had experienced life and death, it did not mean that she had adapted to it. On the contrary, Mayu was more sensitive to such things. In addition, Ereshkigal's temper and personality were very suitable for Mayu's liking. Mayu was familiar with her face, so the two got along well in this short time. For Mayu's question, Wuming smiled casually. How is it possible? When everything is solved, we can come to see your sister L again. We can even bring her to live in the modern world. For humans, time travel was a dangerous function that needed to be restricted or prohibited, but for Wuming, it was something that could be done casually. Really? That's great, Brother Wuming. Mayu recovered again. Seeing Mayu become emotional, Wuming touched Mayu's head with some emotion. You have changed a lot during the time I was not around you. It seems that the contact with Ilya and others has made Mayu grow stronger. Really? Mayu herself was unaware of it. You are cuter than before, after Wuming said jokingly. He directly picked up Mayu and put her on his shoulder. Later, in Mayu's shy exclamation, Wuming dragged Mayu, who was riding on his neck, and followed most of the people in front. God's Tower, between the thrones, where Gilgamesh dealt with government affairs. At this moment, the servants and gods gathered together, and unrelated people such as soldiers were ordered to leave the room by Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh put down the clay tablet in his hand, and looked at the people gathered below with a smile on his face. By the way, at this time, Wuming had put Mayu down from his shoulder. Is it finally time to say goodbye, everyone? Gilgamesh first glanced at the servants he summoned, and now only Nuwak Amaru, Zhuge Kong-ming, Leonidas I, and Merlin were left. Then Gilgamesh looked at Ishtar, Quetzalcoatl, Ereshkigal, and Anna standing in the corner. In a sense, the three goddesses' alliance finally stood on the side of humans. Later, Gilgamesh looked at Wuming and Enkidu standing together, and Wuming's sister in modern times. His sister aside, Wuming and Enkidu would certainly not stay here. They had their own things to do. Ignoring the leopard man and Funbaba, who were hiding and playing, Gilgamesh finally looked at Gadotsi and Matthew. The last master of mankind, Tachika Fujimaru, and her servant, Matthew Gilead, this king has seen your performance during this time in Uruk. Although you are still very weak, this king believes that even without the help of Hyenryong and others, you can still save this era. Gilgamesh's praise made Gadotsi and Matthew quite happy. After such a long time of contact and communication, Gadotsi and Matthew were no longer afraid of Gilgamesh. They now sincerely admired this most ancient king. King Gilgamesh, thank you and everyone for taking care of us during this time. We will not forget you. This was a farewell. Gadotsi didn't just look at Gilgamesh, she also looked at everyone around her. Tachika, especially me. You have to remember me well. Quizzard came to Gadotsi and hugged Gadotsi, making Matthew panic. And me, don't forget the great leopard man. No one knew when the leopard man ran over and joined in the fun. You are a master. Maybe you can summon us as servants to your side. Ereshkigal's tone was quite serious. Humph. Although you can't summon us deity-level servants, that's all that matters. Ishtar said mercilessly with his arms crossed. Goodbye everyone. Anna's farewell was quite concise. In Anna's view, even if a human master couldn't summon god-level servants, there was still a chance to meet them. Lord Fujimaru, you can try to summon me next time. I will kill all your enemies for you. Nuwakimaru seemed to have walked out of the shadow of sadness. Worthy of being a warrior. Me too, but remember to exercise your muscles often. At the last moment, Leonidas I took off his helmet. Exercise of the mind is the most important thing. Zhuge Kongming interjected. However, as Ryder said, we are not god-level servants. You can try to use the fate left by your contact with us during this period of time to summon us. Zhuge Kongming took out a cigar from his pocket and lit it. I know everyone. In short, I will try to summon you. Gadotsi said after getting rid of her big sister's hug. By the way, since this era is safe, will the servants stay? Matthew thought about it. When Hyenryong takes Tiamat and the Holy Grail away, the servants will disappear one after another. At most, only the god-level servants will be able to hold on for a while. Merlin explained. In the end, Wuming also walked in front of Gadotsi and Matthew. Listen to Roman first. When you return to Chaldea, go to your personal room and rest. When I need you, I will use my means to inform Chaldea. I look forward to fighting side by side with you next time, Tachika Matthew. Finally, after Enkidu also said goodbye to Gadotsi and Matthew, Gilgamesh spoke again. In this era, the Mesopotamia of BC has been saved by Chaldea. Now this king orders you to leave here, go to the last singularity, and destroy the final enemy. Romani, Roman who was in Chaldea, heard Gilgamesh's last call. After responding, he immediately began to transfer Gadotsi and Matthew's ray shift. Tachika Matthew, the ray shift has begun. Get ready. Yes, doctor. In the next second, the two's body began to glow, blue particles of light. Fufu suddenly ran out from the corner when the two were about to leave, followed by Fimbaba, who was interested in Fufu. After that, Fufu jumped into Matthew's arms. Fufu. Matthew almost forgot about Fufu. Where did Fufu go? Gadotsi lamented Fufu's powerful hide-and-seek ability. Everyone, goodbye. Gadotsi waved to everyone, and Gadotsi, Matthew and Fufu turned into blue particles and dissipated. After witnessing Gadotsi and Matthew's ray shift, Wuming looked at Enkidu and Mayu, who were hugging Fimbaba. We should also go. Chapter 1038. Inside the origin that looked like a starry sky, on the platform formed in the center, the huge and magnificent white origin dragon opened its eyes and woke up from its slumber. The first thing it did when it woke up from its slumber was to open a virtual screen in the void. The scene on it was an elementary school in a certain world. Wuming, who was in the origin, had the ability to see what was happening in a certain world. Suicune Original Academy Elementary School, where Mayu and Ilya went to school. Before Wuming left, he brought Mayu, Ilya, and the others back to Ilya's world. In any case, Mayu had settled down in Ilya's world and went to school. Wuming wouldn't do such a cruel thing as separating Meiyu and her friends. However, because of the Ainsworth family's technology and the method of crossing between two worlds taught by Wuming, Shiro and the others could go to Meiyu's world to visit Meiyu at any time. On the screen, Meiyu was chatting with Ilya and other friends, but then Meiyu froze for a moment, and then as if waking up from a dream, she fell into a trance. It seemed that Meiyu had received the memory of herself turning into a servant and going to BC. Although it didn't matter if she couldn't receive it, Meiyu's servant body was also Meiyu. Wuming didn't want anything to happen to Meiyu's clone. The heroic spirits in the Valhalla couldn't accept all the memories of the clone, but Meiyu wasn't a heroic spirit, so she could definitely receive those memories. Only when Meiyu's main body received the memories and information of the clone could it prove that the clone had returned safely. Now it seemed that Meiyu had indeed received it, and Wuming was relieved. Meiyu's trance scared Ilya. Seeing Ilya nervously wanting to pull Meiyu to the infirmary, Wuming couldn't help but laugh. Ilya is still so rash. But to Wuming's surprise, he saw an equally nervous Erika on the screen. It was very likely that Julian had used the Ainsworth family's technology to send Erika to this world, and arranged for her to attend school with Meiyu and Ilya. In this regard, Wuming wasn't worried at all. Julian was probably just thinking about his sister, and wanted Erika to experience the life of a normal person. Julian was like an elder brother now. With a thought, the virtual screen disappeared. After all, Wuming only wanted to check on Meiyu's condition, and nothing else. Next it's Tiamat. Wuming said. With a thought, a ball of light exuding the light of the universe appeared in front of Wuming. This was the illusory star Taisui that sealed Tiamat. Let's begin. As if God had said, "Let there be light." The illusory star Taisui was unsealed under the command of God of the origin. Countless black mud rushed out and fell into the origin. In the next second, the entire space of the origin seemed to have come alive and eliminated the black mud at the root. The black mud, which was originally like a river bursting out of a dam, shrank again and quickly disappeared. In the end, only a little bit was left. This was Tiamat's black mud, her sea of life. The black mud that existed in it had all been treated as a virus by the origin and cleaned up by the origin. Immediately afterward, Wuming's huge dragon claw gently tapped the Sea of Life, and a figure immediately separated from the Sea of Life. It was the spiritual base of a servant. It was Musasobo Benkei. After being assimilated by Tiamat's Sea of Life, there was no way to remove it. This was what Ishtar had said, and it was also publicly known. However, in the origin, Wuming could easily separate Musasobo Benkei's spiritual base from the Sea of Life. Wuming's dragon claw gently tapped Musasobo Benkei's spiritual base, and a ripple appeared behind Musasobo Benkei, enveloping Musasobo Benkei. The ripple then disappeared. Wuming sent Musasobo Benkei back to Uruk, where he would meet with Nuwakamaru and the others for a short time. Then, because of the disappearance of the Holy Grail, they would dissipate together and return to the Martyr's Palace. Musasobo Benkei's matter was taken care of. Then, there was Tiamat's problem. Wuming lowered his red eyes and looked at the pink and somewhat cute starry eyes. In the end, the Sea of Life turned into Tiamat, but in human form. Tiamat in human form was no different from a normal woman. In fact, her face and figure could even be considered to be of the highest quality in human aesthetics. At this moment, Tiamat in human form was like a human girl. She sat on the ground like a duck with her legs pressed together as much as possible, and looked up at Wuming. She had a petite body and 2 arms and 2 legs, but she was almost naked. Only some scales and animal skin covered certain parts of Tiamat's body. There was a pair of huge twisted horns on her head, which were almost identical to the horns on Tiamat's head in dragon form. In human form, Tiamat's mouth didn't split open all the way to the back of her head, but her teeth were also serrated. The only thing that satisfied Wuming was her starry eyes. It couldn't be helped. Those starry eyes, together with Tiamat's current appearance, were simply too cute. I really don't know how those gods were able to do it back then. Wuming couldn't help but ridicule. Then Wuming's huge dragon body changed, and Wuming's dragon body turned into human form. After all, Tiamat was very petite at this moment, and it wasn't easy to talk with her huge body. After landing on the platform, Wuming walked in front of Tiamat. Looking at Tiamat, who stared at him motionlessly, Wuming didn't know what to say. He simply sat down facing Tiamat, crossed his arms, and thought silently. If he sent her back, as a human evil, she would definitely be destroyed in the end. Wuming definitely wouldn't do that. Should he send her to another world? If it was another world, he didn't know if Tiamat's human evil ability would still work. Let's give it a try. If it didn't work, he would take her back and think about it at length. However, just as Wuming was thinking, Tiamat moved. Tiamat leaned forward slightly, stretched out her hands, and hugged Wuming's head. Then, while Wuming was in a daze, Tiamat put Wuming down. Then, she placed Wuming's head comfortably on her lap. Obviously, it was a knee pillow. Wuming didn't react at all. Or rather, Wuming was dumbfounded. Although the black mud was removed, Wuming also thought that Tiamat might attack him. However, he didn't think that Tiamat would give him a knee pillow. This was too ridiculous. Wuming couldn't believe it at all. However, it was quite comfortable. "Child. My child." A delicate and ethereal voice came out of Tiamat's mouth. Wuming had some guesses about this. Tiamat's desire for children led her to treat Wuming as her own child. And the knee pillow was just a way for Tiamat to love her child. However, the one she should love wasn't herself. She should love someone else. "Shawan, come out for a second." Wuming swung his hand, and threw out the golden chain wrapped around his arm. The chain turned into a beautiful green-haired person, Enkidu. "Lord Hyunryong, do you want me to replace you?" Enkidu smiled bitterly. She wasn't stupid, and she had been watching from the side. How could she not understand Wuming's meaning? "Just call me Wuming at this time. We're not in Uruk anymore," Wuming corrected her. "Yes, Lord Wuming." Then Wuming nodded. "Also, you're right. Come and enjoy Mother's love for me." Ever since Enkidu came out, Tiamat had noticed her. Enkidu smiled bitterly again, and walked to Tiamat's side. Then, without a doubt, she was also put down and laid on Tiamat's knee pillow. Chapter 1039. The current Enkidu was Enkidu after fusing with Kingu, so Enkidu could be considered Tiamat's son. That was why Wuming wanted to let Enkidu enjoy this motherly love on his behalf. However, why do I have to continue resting on my knees? Wuming tilted his head and body as if he was resting on a pillow. "There's no other way, Lord Wuming. It's probably because you're also Mother's son." Enkidu, who was also leaning on his knees, was facing Wuming with a smile of schadenfreude on his face. Indeed, Hyunryong's rumors mentioned that Hyunryong was Tiamat's son, and that Ulidim and the other magical beasts called Wuming Ramu. The connection must have been made. However, Wuming was not Tiamat's son. Even if it was fabricated, it should not affect Tiamat. Why would she really treat Wuming as her son? Although this knee pillow is quite comfortable, I still have things to do. After all, Wuming was going to find Gydia to solve everything. What was the point of resting on her knees? Tiamat seemed to have heard Wuming's words. She muttered and stroked Wuming's cheek. "Child. My child." Then Tiamat moved Wuming's head away from her knee pillow. Wuming took the opportunity to sit up and look deeply at Tiamat. He did not expect Tiamat to be so understanding. It seemed that she was still thinking about her child. "How about I raise her as a stepmother?" Wuming had this idea. Hearing those words, Tiamat's starry eyes involuntarily lit up. She appeared to be very happy. "Lord Wuming, Mother is probably happy that you've acknowledged her as your mother." Enkidu understood Tiamat. She could tell that Tiamat was very happy. As she spoke, Enkidu tried to sit up. However, Tiamat pressed down on Enkidu's head and stroked it. Wuming smiled helplessly. It was not a big deal to have a mother out of nowhere. It was better to have a long-term plan. However, Wuming did not directly reject this idea. "Let's not talk about my matters for now. I'll have to trouble you to stay here and enjoy the motherly love for me." Similarly, Wuming also stroked Enkidu's head. "Then I'll have Kalas follow you. If you don't bring me along, I'll be worried." Enkidu's face was slightly red, but she was very serious. "I'll always be with Master." Kalas on Wuming's head made her presence felt. "My backup machine is also close to perfection. I can guard the great source on my own. Then, Wu-Ming turned his head and looked into the void. In the next second, little Wu-Ming #1's backup machine suddenly appeared out of thin air. Then the backup machine steadily walked to Wu-Ming's side and laid down on the platform. Once an external entity attempted to enter or attack the great source, Wu-Ming's backup machine would be able to defend against it. Using an analogy, the great source was the home, and Wu-Ming's backup machine was the AI butler. After Wu-Ming activated the backup machine, his body suddenly transformed into a gigantic great source dragon. Then I'll be leaving. In the next second, the dragon flew to the side and disappeared as if it had fallen into an illusion. Go early. Come back early. Tiamat waved her hand stutteringly at the direction where Wu-Ming disappeared, looking very much like a mother sending her son off. Looking at Tiamat like this, Enkidu was a little jealous. You love your child so much. Why did you abandon Kingu? Enkidu and Kingu fused at the Mesopotamia singularity. Tiamat's abandonment of Kingu was naturally engraved in Enkidu's mind. Know that, Tiamat stuttered as she explained. Enkidu's eyes lit up when he realized that there might be something behind the scenes. He quietly listened to Tiamat. Tiamat also stuttered as she explained. However, because of her stuttering, it would probably take a while. Between the worlds. In a large world filled with scenes of the universe, huge transparent spheres floated there one after another, like stars in the universe. These huge spheres were worlds. At some point, a huge white figure suddenly appeared. It was Wu-Ming in his dragon form. No matter how many times I come, this scene always amazes me. Wu-Ming's huge dragon eyes flashed with the light of the universe. Worlds existed in this way, and Wu-Ming was very interested in this phenomenon. Let's take a good look around. After all, traveling between worlds was a wonderful thing. Following this, Wu-Ming flew in a certain direction. Wu-Ming had gone to find Gidia last time, so he naturally remembered the route. However, even if he did not remember, Wu-Ming could still find Gidia by relying on the attraction of their origin powers. Not only had Gidia become stronger, but so had Wu-Ming. In other words, as long as he stayed in the Great Origin, Wu-Ming would continue to grow stronger. In addition, Wu-Ming's body had experienced many years in the box world, and the passage of time had become the best catalyst for Wu-Ming to become stronger. However, the origin dragon before and after reaching adulthood were two different existences. The difference was like the difference between an ant and a dragon. As an existence who was only one step away from becoming an adult origin dragon, Wu-Ming could sense this. In fact, it was best for Wu-Ming to wait until he reached adulthood before finding and killing Gidia. That was the safest way. However, time waited for no one. Who knew if Gidia had comprehended something from the Black Origin Mud? Or if he had analyzed the power of the Black Origin Mud? And most importantly, Gidia must have had something to do when he burned the human essences, and Wu-Ming had to stop him. Now, it was too late for Wu-Ming to figure out how to cross that step and reach adulthood. As mentioned before, the adulthood of the origin dragon wasn't something that could be achieved with time alone. As for how to do it, Wu-Ming didn't know. So Wu-Ming needed time to figure it out. For example, Wu-Ming was like a prince who had been stranded in the world. He relied on his own efforts to return to his country, but after finding the palace with great difficulty, he wanted to find the royal family to learn how to become stronger, only to find that the royal family was all dead, and there was no way to find anyone to learn how to become stronger. However, if Wu-Ming could stay in the palace for a while longer, he might be able to find a way to become stronger. But this required time, and Wu-Ming didn't have time. I'm already very strong now. Even if Gidia completely grasps the secret of the Black Origin Mud, he can only tie with me at best. This was Wu-Ming's worst-case scenario. Wu-Ming had experienced a lot since the last time he fought Gidia. If Wu-Ming encountered Gidia at the same level as last time, he would definitely be able to crush him. However, Wu-Ming also knew that Gidia had also become stronger. Even so, Wu-Ming was still not afraid. If something really happens, I'll just run back to the origin and hide. Yes, Wu-Ming's idea was very simple. If Gidia's strength exceeded his expectations, Wu-Ming would run back to the origin and hide. In any case, The origin dragon in the origin was like a tiger in the forest or a flood dragon in the sea. Wuming was a god in the origin. However, it wasn't very likely that it would come to that. Let's hurry up and settle everything. With that, Wuming sped up and disappeared. Chapter 1040. Between the worlds, in a certain place filled with the scenery of the universe, there was a small independent world that had separated itself from the original world. At a closer look, it seemed to be a group of open-air platforms of various shapes and colors. There was a spotlessly white platform that was larger than the other platforms. At the same time, it was located on top of the other platforms. The other platforms revolved around this platform that was much taller than them, like stars surrounding the moon. On this spotlessly white platform, there was a spotlessly white jade seat in the center. If it wasn't for the dark universe with specks of starlight as the background, but instead the blue sky and white clouds, this place would probably be a beautiful scenery. However, the spotlessly white jade seat contrasted with the cosmic-like background between the platform and the world, making it stand out and rather eye-catching. On the jade seat on the platform, there was a humanoid existence that was much taller than ordinary humans, sitting upright on the jade seat. He seemed to be the master of this independent small world. He was Gidea, the existence that had impersonated King Solomon and commanded the 72 demon god pillars, the demon god King Gidea. At this moment he seemed to be waiting for someone. Not long after, a spotlessly white figure flew over from the cosmic-like sky. It was Wuming in his dragon form. "You seem to be waiting for me." Wuming's voice came from the mouth of the origin dragon. Unlike his original rough voice, Wuming's voice did not change when he was in his dragon form. "Because I knew you would come looking for me." Gidea's voice was as rough as ever. "Then do you know that today is the day you die, Gidea?" Wuming opened his huge dragon mouth, gathering white flames that contained the power of origin. Then he instantly shot it out. This was a killing move filled with power. Rumble. The sound of something huge moving was heard. Countless vines appeared out of nowhere, forming a net that blocked Wuming's flames of origin. The net could not withstand the burning of the fire of origin. In an instant, the vines that made up the net were broken and burned to ashes. However, in the next second, new vines would appear to fill in the gaps in the net. Only then was Wuming's origin flame blocked. However, upon closer inspection, it wasn't vines that formed the net. Instead, it was pillars of flesh that were covered in eyes. These pillars were the 72 demon god pillars. No, they should be called the 71 demon god pillars now. After all, the concept of Floros was sealed in the Holy Grail by Wuming and given to Chaldea for safekeeping. However, even if one of the 72 demon god pillars was missing, it didn't matter. The concept of 72 demon god pillars, as a whole, could still be maintained. Therefore, these pillars would never be destroyed, and the only way was to get rid of Gidea. Even if Wuming's origin flame could burn these pillars of flesh, they were indestructible and could be said to be infinite. The net formed by them was not easy to break through, so there was not much point in continuing like this. As a result, Wuming stopped spewing fire. "You have always been so impatient, origin dragon." It was unknown what had happened to Gaia, but she was calmer than before. Her strength had also increased. Just the fact that his command blocked Wuming's attack was enough to prove this. If Gidea in the past was a stray hyena in the wilderness, then Gidea was now a lone tiger in the forest. "Looks like you really obtained something from the black origin soil." Wuming's huge dragon eyes flashed with an expression of as expected. "Actually, it's all thanks to you." Gidea was still sitting on his jade throne, looking rather calm. "I originally wanted to detonate all the black origin soil I summoned to blow you to smithereens. But I didn't expect the power to affect me as well." Sure enough, Gidea was the same as Wuming at that time, heavily injured by the black origin soil. However, the damage caused by the black origin soil became a catalyst for me, allowing me to successfully obtain the power of the origin. After Gidea finished speaking, a huge amount of magic power rushed out of Gidea's body. This magic power contained a large amount of origin power, which was exactly the same as Wuming's. So what? At best, Gidea stood at the same height as Wuming. In other words, Wuming was the orthodox, while Gitya was the heretic. However, Gitya did not care about Wuming's disdain. Instead, he changed the topic. Do you know why I wanted to burn human reason? Wuming naturally did not know. Humans are ugly, cruel, bloodthirsty, and full of evil. Gitya began to criticize humans. Although there are excellent and kind humans, it is undeniable that most humans are pests on this planet. They are trash, a danger that must be eliminated. Gitya was a little agitated. He even stood up and spread his hands. I want to destroy humans, destroy human history, destroy the proof and records of human existence, and destroy these existences that make me feel disgusted. If that was the case, it was obvious that Gitya had done it. Human history had been burned. If it was not for the influence of Chaldea's magnetic field, humans would have gone extinct. However, this planet will give birth to humans again no matter what. This was something that could not be violated. This was something that would inevitably happen. At most, the next batch of humans and this batch of humans would have some differences, but they would be the same in essence. They would be ugly, cruel, and bloodthirsty. Therefore, I want to use the entire human history that I have burned as fuel to help me return to the past, reshape the species that ruled this planet, and change everything from the root. This was the truth of the burning of human reason. Wuming snorted at this. Are you trying to say that you're great? Wuming had encountered quite a few of these self-righteous fellows. Shiro Amakusa, Shirjun was one of them. They only thought that humans needed to be saved and changed, so they began to act. They did not care about the sacrifices that would be made in the process, or how many people would be sacrificed. It could only be said that these people had good intentions, but their methods were wrong. No one could dictate the fate of others. Not humans, not gods, not Gitya, not Wuming. However, Wuming also knew that these people could not be changed with mere words. Only fists could stop them. As for how to change their minds, that was not something that Wuming could care about. In any case, Wuming was not prepared to let them live. Gitya had already grasped the black soil and obtained the power of the origin. Any existence with the black soil would view Wuming as a mortal enemy. Wuming did not know if Gitya could be saved in this situation. As such, there was only one answer left, and that was to completely kill them. At the same time, Gitya was thinking the same thing. This was because Gitya knew about the existence of the origin. Chapter 1041. Gitya was powerless to change all of this, which was why he wanted to burn human principles, and use the energy obtained from burning human principles as a driving force to help Gitya return to the past and reshape humanity from its roots. Unexpectedly, Gitya obtained the black origin soil, and also unexpectedly grasped the power of origin. If he could control the origin, it would be much more reliable than going back to the past to change humanity from its roots. In addition, the existence of the black origin soil would have an indelible hostility towards Wuming, so Gitya could take advantage of the situation to get rid of Wuming and replace him to take control of the origin. And Gitya also had the same idea. Therefore, after Gaia had obtained the power of origin, it did not allow the mantras to recover. Gaia still retained the energy of the mantras after being burned, because it wanted to use it as a weapon to destroy Wuming's weapon. Ha 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 ha, great. That's my duty. I'm not great. Gaia laughed. I am the product of the collective consciousness of the 72 demon god pillars. I am the evil of humanity standing on the opposite side of humanity. I am the number one beast, I who holds the principle of compassion. I am Gitya who burns human principles, demon god King Gitya. Behind Gitya's jade throne, the demon god pillars gradually wrapped around it. Countless demon god pillars first withered like dehydration, then intertwined like the roots of an old tree, and finally formed a huge sphere that slowly rose. In the middle of the sphere, a red light appeared. It was filled with a huge amount of magic power, and this magic power was accompanied by a lot of origin power. Seeing this, Wuming felt a little uneasy. My duty is to burn human principles and reshape humanity. Everything I do is for this planet, for the world. And you will also become my fuel to help me reach the origin and save all the worlds. Along with Gitya's bold words, The red light in the middle of the tree behind Gydia suddenly expanded, and a purple ray that was magnified several times erupted at Wu Ming. Shoo! The sound of light shuttling between worlds was extremely ear-piercing. This light contained the power of origin, enough to destroy Wu Ming, and completely enveloped Wu Ming. Not long after, the light gradually weakened until it dissipated. The huge tree ball also entered a charging standby state. The ray that penetrated Wu Ming and shot into the distance also exploded, causing the entire world to shake. Many worlds were affected. In fact, a few transparent spheres that happened to be in the path of the light directly disappeared. At Wu Ming's original position, the spherical light film covered Wu Ming's body, preventing Wu Ming from suffering any damage. This was the defense created by Wu Ming's armor of debate, and it needed to be powered by origin energy, so the barrier was covered in origin energy. Only origin power could fight against origin power. This was the law. Therefore, Gydia was only standing at the same height as Wu Ming. However, Gydia's move was enough to surprise Wu Ming. Gaia's technique destroyed several transparent spheres of light, each of which was a world. Even ordinary humans had differences in strength. Even if Wu Ming and Gydia stood at the same height, there were still differences. Judging from the attack just now, Gaia's offensive prowess had surpassed Wu Ming's. This guy can't be underestimated. Although Wu Ming didn't have the intention to underestimate Gydia, he was even more cautious now. However, Wu Ming didn't believe that Gydia's attack didn't have any limitations. That was the energy produced by the humanity that you burned, right? And since it was energy, there would be a time when it would be exhausted. One had to know that humanity only lasted for a few thousand years and wasn't endless. I don't have nearly endless magic power like you. Only by using the ashes of humanity that I'm going to use as fuel can I be confident in killing you. Even the Magus King Solomon didn't have endless magic power, so it was even more impossible for Gydia to have it. That was why he needed to use the energy obtained from burning humanity as fuel to fight against Wu Ming, who had nearly unlimited magic power. I have to say, Gydia, you are the strongest enemy I've ever faced. Wu Ming had encountered many powerful enemies, and they also had existences that could kill Wu Ming. However, they couldn't kill Wu Ming as easily as Gydia because they didn't have the origin power. Gydia, on the other hand, had the origin power and the origin black mud that countered Wu Ming. He could easily eliminate Wu Ming, provided that his attack hit its target. My dream was achieved by stepping on the corpse of your origin dragon. Accept your fate. Wang. The huge tree ball behind Gydia was fully charged. The red light appeared once again, and began to gather a huge amount of magic power with the origin power. It was obvious that Gydia was going to use the same move again. However, Wu Ming wouldn't give him another chance. Fear the one with wings. Evil people and powerful people are all afraid of me with wings. My wings will bring you curses. Evil people can't hit me. With the origin power, Wu Ming's figure suddenly disappeared and instantly appeared in front of Gydia. In the next second, a pure white dragon claw reached out and slashed at Gydia with unstoppable force. Indeed, Gydia had the origin power and could easily kill Wu Ming. On the other hand, Wu Ming, who also had the origin power, could easily kill Gydia. It was like both sides had max attack power, but only 1 HP. The moment one's killing move hit the other, victory would be decided instantly. However, Gydia's attack range was too large. Once Wu Ming got close to Gydia, his attack would be restricted. After all, Gydia couldn't possibly fit himself into the purple light cannon's attack range. Gydia didn't want to take him down with himself. Therefore, Wu Ming chose to get close. Wu Ming's dragon claw landed on the jade seat and immediately shattered it. Countless demon god pillars danced wildly and surrounded Wu Ming. As for Gaia, she flew to the side. Afterwards, Gydia gathered energy in his hands. The black, origin black mud mixed with tremendous magic power was shot out from Gydia's hands, shooting at the huge Wu Ming. Light immediately shone from Wu Ming's body. The huge, origin dragon disappeared, replaced by Wu Ming's human form with the blade of salvation in hand. Wu Ming easily dodged Gydia's attack. Using the light produced by the dragon transformation as a cover, he continued to use the power of the phoenix to charge at Gydia. Swish! Gydia dodged in advance and slashed with the blade of salvation, only cutting off a corner of the burning branch above Gydia's head. Immediately, the broken branch that separated from Gydia's head was like a leaf that had been injected with sulfuric acid. It decayed and turned black, until it shattered and disappeared. A large number of demon god pillars took advantage of the situation and surrounded Wuming, twisting in a spiral and forming huge pillars. And Wuming was entangled in these twisting huge pillars. However, in the next second, sword light suddenly appeared and the huge pillar was directly cut in the middle. Wuming's figure turned into a streak of light and reappeared in front of Gydia. Afterwards, before Gydia could react, he raised his blade. Pa. Chapter 1042. Wuming's divine blade of salvation slashed down, but it did not cut anything because Gydia caught the white blade with both hands and clamped Wuming's divine blade of salvation with both hands. Gydia maintained his posture of clamping Wuming's divine blade of salvation with both hands and spoke leisurely. Sure enough, you're the expert in close combat. What a joke. Wuming's skills from Skaha were not for playing with monkeys, but for killing enemies. Let's not talk about other things first. Even a sword master who only practiced one sword skill all year round could defeat a king who had led an army and had good martial arts skills. Gydia was Solomon's magic form. How could he beat Wuming in close combat? Wuming smiled at this. If you're not convinced, in an instant, Wuming held the divine blade of salvation with both hands and skillfully slid it out of Gydia's hands. Then accept your death obediently. The divine blade of salvation that slid out of Gydia's hands slashed down at Gydia from below. Shing! The black demon god's flesh pillar that blocked Gydia in time was cut in half. Gydia, on the other hand, retreated backward. In the next second, Gydia's humanoid cannon that he had long prepared was instantly launched. The purple ray once again engulfed Wuming's figure, who did not have time to activate the Phoenix incarnation. However, immediately after, the spirit of speech that contained the power of origin came out of the purple light pillar. I am the strongest and the one who holds all victory in my hands. Whether it's human or demon, I'm the one who defeats all enemies' hostility. I will defeat any enemy who stands in my way. Puff! Like a fish rushing out of the sea, a burly golden giant rushed out of the purple light pillar. The burly giant seemed to be corroded, and its body was full of holes and incomplete. However, Wuming, who was in the middle of the giant's shadow, was unharmed. The purple ray of the humanoid cannon dissipated, and the aftermath of the explosion still erupted somewhere between the worlds. Needless to say, a few worlds must have been destroyed this time. Wuming dispelled the giant incarnation and stood opposite Gydia, who was floating in the void not far away. Around them were squirming pillars of various colors with eyes. From Wuming's close attack on Gydia to Wuming's use of the giant avatar as a shield to escape the beam of the humanoid cannon, it only took a few seconds. The victory and defeat that had almost been decided was actually just a facade. However, in the end, Wuming still had the upper hand. After all, Wuming had cut off a corner of Gydia's head, while Gydia did not cause any injuries to Wuming. Origin Dragon, you are indeed very powerful, but you still haven't reached that height. It seemed that Gydia had not only obtained origin power from the black origin mud, but also some information about the origin dragon. Even if I haven't reached that height, it's more than enough to deal with you. Wuming stretched his neck and brandished the divine blade of salvation. The previous fight with Gydia was actually a test. Wuming did not have many moves, except for close combat martial arts and the divine blade of salvation. Magic and magic were barely enough to resist Gydia's humanoid cannon, but other than that, Wuming still had 12 avatars. By seizing the authority of multiple gods and adapting to Wuming's own authority, the 12 avatars of the 12 authority, God's Killer, were quite powerful. Each avatar of the authority was not weaker than the authority of the other gods' layers, and it was considered a first-class move in other worlds. Now, not to mention using all 12 avatars at once. Using multiple avatars at once was a piece of cake for the current Wuming. This could be considered one of Wuming's trump cards. Gydia was obviously not as good as Wuming in close combat. The reason why he dared to attack Wuming even after knowing Wuming's identity and strength was entirely because of the black origin mud and the origin power, that Gideon had obtained from it. The test is over. Let's officially begin. Wuming raised the divine blade of salvation, and at the tip of the sword, the light of the sun shone in this cosmic-like world. Wuming was ready for a big wave. However, Gideon seemed to have a stroke and laughed for some reason. Ha. Ha. Ha 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 dash. Wuming ignored Gideon's laughter and instantly condensed a sun at the tip of the divine blade of salvation. However, at this moment, the demon god pillar beside Gideon wriggled. And then, something was presented in front of Gideon by the demon god pillar, as if it was presenting a treasure. It was a building wrapped in a transparent ball of light, and it was still snowing heavily inside, as if it was a Christmas crystal ball. However, Wuming recognized this thing. This was Chaldea, a human security organization located on a snowy mountain a few thousand meters above sea level. It was also where Gadotzi, Matthew, Roman, and Olga Marie were currently located. I see. Wuming directly dispersed the sun at the tip of the sword. When you transformed your jade throne into a small world and left the world of the type moon, did you bring Chaldea with you? Did Flawless help you locate it? After all, Chaldea was considered a singularity that was difficult to find after being burned by the Anthropocene. Gideon wouldn't be able to find it so easily, and the origin black mud and origin power weren't omnipotent. That's right. It was the moment Flawless escaped from your seal, he sent me Chaldea's location, but there's something I need to say. Gideon took the Chaldea crystal ball with one hand. Long before you entered the Mesopotamia singularity, I had already done this. In other words, whether it was Gadotzi and Wuming smoothly arriving in Mesopotamia or successfully solving the problem of the Mesopotamia singularity, it was all under Gideon's control. So, it seemed that the reason why Chaldea was able to reverse locate Gideon's lair was actually because of Gideon's instructions? At this moment, Wuming couldn't help but frown. Gideon taking this out now not only meant that he had been going easy on Wuming, but in a sense he was also threatening Wuming. Because Gideon saw Wuming's concern. You really cherish these worlds. That's right, Wuming cherished the worlds between the worlds, or rather, he didn't want them to be hurt. The reason why Wuming fought in close combat, and didn't give Gideon a chance to fire the light cannon was entirely because Wuming was afraid that Gideon's light cannon would affect other worlds. Wuming knew many people in many worlds, including many friends and family members. After Wuming saw that Gideon's humanoid cannon had the ability to destroy worlds, Wuming chose to fight in close combat with Gideon. Because Wuming didn't want these worlds to be destroyed, he didn't want his friends and family to be in danger. Moreover, although Wuming wasn't overly compassionate, and in a sense, Wuming was an evil person, even he didn't want to see the worlds with living creatures destroyed by Gideon's humanoid cannon. Whether it was the former or the latter, they were all reasons why Wuming wanted to stop Gideon from firing the humanoid cannon. Wuming was worried that Gideon would see through this, so he tried his best to hide his intention. He made the first move before Gideon fired the second humanoid cannon, which could be considered as an act of striking first to gain the upper hand. However, who would have thought that Wuming's intention would be seen through by Gideon? Chapter 1043. Are you trying to threaten me? Wuming went straight to the point. No matter what, Gaia was still a respectable figure. How could she do something so despicable as to threaten him? However, Gaia was kind enough to explain the situation. Why would I? I'm just telling you that Chaldea is under my protection. You don't have to worry about Chaldea being affected by our battle. Then Gideon put away Chaldea's crystal ball as if he was really thinking about Wuming. However, Wuming didn't relax at all. Firstly, Chaldea was still in Gideon's hands. What it said just now was another kind of threat. Secondly, other than the worlds that Wuming was unfamiliar with, there were many worlds that Wuming cared about that were still in between. In other words, once Gideon's artificial cannon was activated, there was a chance that it would affect those worlds. And Gideon said this because he wanted to get information from Wuming. In short, Gideon's artificial cannon had to be stopped. Otherwise, he would have to take it all on and not let the aftermath of the artificial cannon affect those worlds. All evildoers, be afraid of my power. I am the strongest, and I hold all victory in my hands. I will deny the sky, Deny the earth. Make a pact with me, listen to my call, and obey my command. Thou hast violated the contract and brought evil to the world. Bestow the torrential flood upon me. Let out a dazzling radiance and grant me divine power. Evildoers can't hit me. Wuming chanted the words of the 8 incarnations in one breath. Moreover, he condensed the 8 words into one sentence, forming a short version of each incarnation's spirit. Although it sounded a little out of place, the effect wasn't bad at all. A huge dark purple draconic shadow appeared around Wuming. A huge white and pure black divine blade of salvation appeared in the hands of the huge draconic shadow. Black clouds appeared above the huge draconic shadow and kept spreading to the surroundings. In this cosmic-like place, there was a storm, lightning, and thunder, and the seawater had already surrounded the entire Temple of Time. This is a new world. Gidea was surprised. Dark clouds covered the sky, and the sea surged under Gidea's feet. There was no end to the clouds and no end to the sea. The storm with lightning and thunder fell suddenly, and the sea surged violently, crashing into the Temple of Time. Gidea could sense that his Temple of Time and the demon god pillars had arrived in a new world. Without a doubt, this was a new world created by Wuming's spirit of speech. This way, we won't have to worry about affecting the worlds in between. As soon as Wuming's words reached Gidea's ears, Wuming appeared in front of Gidea with the divine blade of salvation in his hand. The huge sword shadow of the divine blade of salvation slashed down at Gidea. Clang! Gidea blocked the attack. Gidea crossed his hands and clenched them into fists, and the sword shadow of the divine blade of salvation slashed at his fists. Upon closer inspection, it wasn't the fist that blocked Wuming's attack, but the ring on Gidea's finger. Although Gidea was a 3-meter-tall humanoid creature, his body was very different from a human's body. For example, Gidea's hands were enough to crush several people's heads at once. The 10 rings on his thick hands looked like brass knuckles. However, no matter how much they looked like brass knuckles, they were still just rings. Crack. Sure enough, there was a crack in one of the rings. Gidea suddenly exerted force and pushed Wuming's body away. As for the cracked ring on Gaia's finger, it shattered in an instant. Wuming, who knew Roman's identity, easily guessed what the 10 rings on Gidea's finger were. The broken one is a fake, right? Wuming wasn't in a hurry. Instead, he slowly chatted with Gidea. Gidea, who was suddenly attacked, wasn't angry. He followed Wuming's words and replied, "My king had 10 rings, but he only left 9 rings. One of them was missing, so I made one myself." The king that Gidea mentioned was King Solomon. As for the fake ring that Gaia had created, it was the one that had shattered earlier. But that's not important. We don't need a king anymore. I'm our king. In an instant, the man-made cannon that was already prepared at the back of the Jade Throne was launched. And the target was Wuming. However, Wuming didn't dodge this time. Because if he did, this temporary world that was hard to form would be destroyed by the cannon. Boom! Whoosh! Whoosh whoosh! Thunder rumbled, lightning flashed, thunder rumbled. Waves surged, wind howled, thunder rained, and waves rushed toward the cannon that was fired at Wuming as if they were alive. The moment they came into contact, the thunder, rain, and waves were dyed with a layer of black destructive power. The two collided in an instant. A huge explosion occurred in this world. White light illuminated this world that only had sea and storm. Wuming had returned to the route without anyone noticing. On the central platform, Wuming landed in his human form. "Lord Wuming, why are you back?" After listening to Tiamat's explanation, Enkidu, who was still enjoying the pillow on his lap, instantly got up and came to Wuming's side. Tiamat didn't stop him. Instead, she sat aside obediently and didn't disturb him. "There's a problem. I had my clone stall Gidea for a while." That's right. The clone that was fighting Gidea was Wuming's full strength. At that time, Wuming had used the simple spiritual language formed by the 8 clones: Dragon Seed, Giant, Storm, Annihilation, Flood, Thunder God, Phoenix, and Dependence. The ability of the Dependence clone was that when a clone was created, the clone would inherit 100% of the original strength. In other words, the clone could still use the 12 powers. Wu-Ming had also given the Divine Blade of Salvation to the clone. The Divine Blade of Salvation, which couldn't be duplicated, could be considered as a cover for the clone. The Thunder God clone, the Storm clone, and the Flood clone, combined with the power of the root, formed a simple and crude world. After that, Wu-Ming used the Phoenix to escape from this world. At the same time, he had the clone use the Phoenix clone to ambush Gidia. Even Gidia wouldn't be able to tell that it was a clone that was fighting it. The reason Wu-Ming didn't fight Gidia was mainly because it wasn't easy. Gaia not only hijacked Chaldea, but its artificial cannons can also destroy the worlds between the worlds at any time and anywhere. Victory or defeat aside, there would be heavy casualties in the end. That was why Wu-Ming had his doppelganger fight Gaia for the time being, delaying as much as possible. That was why his doppelganger and Gaia had talked about the ring. Unfortunately, Gaia did not give the clones a chance to chat. After chatting for a while, she once again launched a sneak attack on Silence clones with the human logic cannon, and the battle began again. As for why Wu-Ming wanted to return to the root, it was naturally to solve the current situation that was getting worse. Chapter 1044. Gidia had the humanoid cannon, and with its origin power, it could destroy any world in between with a single shot. Not only that, but it also had Chaldea as a hostage. If Wu-Ming fought with Gidia for real, Wu-Ming would definitely have some reservations. Therefore, Wu-Ming returned to the origin, and prepared to explore the secret of the origin dragon's adulthood. Only by reaching that height would Wu-Ming be able to effortlessly deal with Gidia, save Chaldea, and protect the various worlds. At that time, Wu-Ming might also find a way to restore the worlds destroyed by Gidia's humanoid cannon. But how would Wu-Ming find out the secret of adulthood? As mentioned before, it would take time since he had no clue. But now, Wu-Ming had a clue, which was why he escaped and returned to the origin. Gidia was injured by the black origin mud and obtained origin power from it. Wu-Ming looked at Enkidu and suddenly said, "So, I want to give it a try." As soon as he said that, Enkidu was shocked and his expression changed. Lord Wu-Ming. Enkidu had been by Wu-Ming's side for a long time, so he basically knew all of Wu-Ming's secrets. There was not much that he did not know. Therefore, Enkidu knew very well how harmful the black origin mud was to Wu-Ming. Most importantly, almost all of the black origin mud that wandered between worlds had been used by Gidia as bombs. There were so many of them that their power was unimaginable. Otherwise, Wu-Ming would not have chosen to leave his body and transfer his consciousness to the backup machine. Since the black origin mud between worlds had been summoned by Gidia and caused an explosion, there was no more black origin mud between worlds. Only some worlds still had black origin mud. After wandering around for a long time, the origin black mud accidentally entered these worlds. Wu-Ming had encountered black origin soil in quite a few worlds. The main body of Erica that Darius used was Pandora's box, which contained the origin black soil. When Wu-Ming was fighting against the last king, Roman, in the Godslayer world, he had accidentally shattered the world barrier. If he had not stopped in time, the origin black soil surrounding the Godslayer world might have entered the Godslayer world. The black origin soil also existed in the Star Cup, and it had even given the Star Cup its own consciousness. The origin black mud had once existed in the root of the origin, and had almost stolen Wu-Ming's home after Wu-Ming's return. Although the origin black mud in the box court world was brought in by Wu-Ming, it had also affected that world, and Az-Dakaha had changed a lot because of it. In the Mesopotamia singularity, Tiamat had also fused with the origin black mud for some reason. Her authority, the Sea of Life, had also fused with the origin black mud, and Tiamat had also become extremely strange and powerful. However, after all that had been said, one thing was very clear, and that was that the origin black mud had all been eliminated. There was very little black origin mud in Pandora's box, and after being sealed for so many years, it had weakened. After fusing with Wu-Ming, it had luckily been eliminated by the immature Wu-Ming. The origin black mud that had almost entered the Godslayer world must have been eliminated in the explosion caused by Gidia. The origin black mud in the Star Cup had fused with the Star Cup's consciousness, and was finally eliminated by Wu-Ming. The origin black mud in the Big Origin had also been eliminated by Wu-Ming using the power of the Big Origin. In the box court world, the origin black mud had entered Azedakaha's body and was eliminated by Wu-Ming in the end. Even Azedakaha's soul had perished, and his body had been transformed into an absolute evil spirit base by Wu-Ming. As for Tiamat, Wu-Ming had also used the Void Star Taisui seal on Azedakaha's body to bring her to the Big Origin to be purified. In the end, Wu-Ming even had a mother? In any case, all of this meant that the origin black mud that Wu-Ming had encountered or known about had all been eliminated, and not a trace was left. There was no origin black mud between worlds. Only in some worlds, there might be some origin black mud mixed in, but Wu-Ming did not have the time to look for it. Therefore, Enkidu's meaning was very clear. Not to mention the secret of using the origin black mud to trigger adulthood. There was not even a shadow of the origin black mud. But in the next second, Wu-Ming took out a ball of origin black mud. The ball of origin black mud, which had shrunk into a ball, appeared in Wu-Ming's hand as if it was afraid. It was as smooth and round as a black jade ball, and those who did not know would have thought it was a precious jade. Lord Wu-Ming, where did you get this? Enkidu looked at Wu-Ming in confusion and surprise. Kalas answered Enkidu. When Master was fighting with Gaia, he took the opportunity to take some. That's right. When Wu-Ming destroyed Gidea's jade throne, Gidea used the origin black mud to attack Wu-Ming when he dodged, and Wu-Ming grabbed a handful at that time. In fact, when Wu-Ming first heard that Gidea obtained his power from the origin black mud, he had planned to get some origin black mud from Gidea for research. After all, who knew if Wu-Ming would destroy Gidea in the end? To be safe, Wu-Ming collected some origin black mud in advance and planned to test it out after killing Gidea. However, who would have thought that Gidea would add the threat of holding Chaldea hostage to the threat of the Anthropocene cannon? With no other choice, Wu-Ming, who changed his tactics at the last minute, chose to escape and let his doppelganger deal with Gidea, while Wu-Ming brought the origin black mud back to the origin to try and see if he could obtain the secret of coming of age. This idea was a little uncertain, but Wu-Ming was uncertain. As an old gambler, Wu-Ming was also gambling. Wu-Ming was not sure if the origin black mud could help Wu-Ming obtain the secret of coming of age. So Wu-Ming gambled on the good side and came back to try. Wu-Ming had also been severely injured by the origin black mud together with Gidea, but Wu-Ming managed to separate his mind from his body in time, and went to the backup machine, so he did not know if the origin black mud had any effect on Wu-Ming's growth. However, the reason why Wu-Ming's body grew so quickly was probably not entirely because he stayed in the box garden world for a long time. The passage of time could indeed have an effect on the growth of the origin dragon, but the number of years needed was astronomical. Therefore, it was very likely that the origin black mud did have a promoting effect on Wu-Ming's growth. It was a pity that Wu-Ming had shifted his mind back then, and did not experience the secrets brought by the origin black mud, nor did he know the changes the origin black mud had on Wu-Ming's body. Thinking about it carefully, Wu-Ming increasingly felt that the reason he was approaching the level of coming of age so quickly was very likely because he was severely injured by the origin black mud back then. Now, Wu-Ming did not know whether to laugh or cry. If Wu-Ming's mind had not shifted to the backup machine back then, he might have beaten Gidea up by now. However, Wu-Ming didn't regret it. After all, if the events of a certain time in the past were to change, then everything that Wu-Ming experienced in the future would probably be completely different. Wu-Ming cherished all the people and things that he had encountered so far. So regret? That was impossible. Although the origin black mud was indeed terrifying to Wu-Ming, when he thought about the people and things that he had encountered so far, Wu-Ming suddenly felt that the origin black mud was actually not that scary. Looking at the origin black mud floating in his hand, Wu-Ming immediately made up his mind. You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.